Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Aishwarya, and I'm a doctoral student at the Center for Wildlife Studies. I'm thrilled to host this month's edition of CWS Wildlife Chronicles. We have a fascinating topic and an incredible speaker for our webinar this evening. And the theme for today's topic and webinar is Trunks and Tails, Elephant Conservation and Human-Elephant Interaction. So as we wrap up the Elephant Awareness Month this August, we are honored to have with us Dr. Nitin Sekar, a renowned conservation scientist and the author of What's Left of the Jungle. So a very warm welcome, Nitin. Thank you so much for being part of this webinar.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
So to quickly give you all a brief bio of Nitin Sekar, Dr. Nitin Sekar is a conservation scientist committed to make human rights and animal welfare to us central to our relationship with other species. Nitin received his PhD in ecology and certificate in environmental policy from Princeton University, after which he served as a science policy fellow in Office of Forestry and Biodiversity at the U.S. Agency of International Development. Nitin then became WWF India's first national lead for elephant conservation, building a comprehensive program to study and address human-elephant conflict. Nitin's work on illegal ivory trade helped prevent premature legalization of ivory during 2016 meeting of Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. He led authorship of Field Manual and Managing Human-Elephant Conflict, co-publishing with Indian Ministry of Environmental, Forests and Climate Change. And his book on economic development and conservation, What's Left of Jungle, a conservation story, was a finalist for 2 national book awards in India. Committed to finding scalable interventions to prove human-animal relations, Nitin has teamed up with Conservation X Lab to develop first alternative protein program in a wildlife conservation organization. So Nitin, thank you so much for being part of this talk. And I want to start asking you a question by what really inspired you to focus your study and your career on elephants? And what about these majestic creatures that actually drew you into this field?
Sure. Thanks for the question. Thanks again to the Center for Wildlife Studies for having me. Obviously, all our leaders in the science of conservation in India and beyond. So I was born and raised in the U.S. And so I, kind of grew up going to the local zoo, and, watching nature documentaries. And so I always, I was always interested in my Indian heritage, and I also was interested in Indian wildlife. And so when I would visit India and spend time, especially in Bangalore and Delhi with my relatives, I would kind of beg my mama, my uncle to take me to wildlife reserves. And so eventually started taking me to Ranganathitu, Mudumalai, that sort of thing, especially in South India. And, so I was, I would always feel, as though, people are ruining the environment. They're cutting down forests, and they're ruining animal habitat. And, we have to defend the animals from people and all that sort of thing. But then over time, I realized that the people who are actually living in places, around Mudumalai or Ranganathitu or in these things, that they're often people who hadn't had all the opportunities that I had had. So they didn't have, maybe access to the best education. They didn't always have their political rights recognized. So over time, I realized it's not so simple a problem that you just need to keep people away from animal habitat. These people are trying to survive. They're trying to get firewood to cook for their families. They're trying to find NTFPs to sell. And so over time, I realized that, this is not just a problem of conservation. It's also a problem of social justice. How do you make sure that these people also have rights and that they're able to pursue their livelihoods and aspirations the same way that, I've been very lucky to have that opportunity. And so in this process of looking at this complex relationship between people and the environment, elephants became, I think, a potent symbol of that, right? Because they're both the best and the worst of human-animal relations. On the plus side, we have a long history in India of deep relationships with elephants. We recognize them as individuals who have personalities and, who love other individuals or hate other individuals. Right? Just like humans have diverse personalities, elephants have personalities. They clearly, form affection towards other individual elephants and people. And they seem to solve problems, and they're so strong, and they can use that strength either to pluck a little petal off a leaf or off a flower, or they can knock down a tree. And so that they represent the wonder of nature and the vibrancy of animal personality more than any other species. But at the same time, they're deadly, right? They arguably kill more human beings than any other wild vertebrate except for snakes in India. Now, at least when I was there last year, the most recent estimates were around 500 people a year. They prevent hundreds of thousands of people from realizing their livelihood aspirations because they eat their crops or sometimes knock down their buildings. And people living around elephants love them, but in many cases, but they're also often terrified to go out at night because of them. So to me, they represented this unsolved question, right? Of how do you make sure that, animals who also have, joys and fears and can, enjoy life, but also can suffer, that we as a, but they don't have any political rights mostly. Like how do we make sure that they also get to, some level of protection from, especially from human avarice and greed and destruction of habitat. But how do we also make sure that the most marginalized people in our society who haven't gotten the kind of opportunities that I have, or maybe you have, that they have a chance to move up? So how do we serve both these groups? And because elephants represented that conflict so potently, I decided to spend quite a bit of time working on them.
That is amazing, Nitin. Thank you for sharing that. So it is so true that elephants have they're such individuals, and there is such, which makes the whole dynamics of human-elephant interaction so complex to study about. So I want to ask you, that leads to my next question, asking how, since you've been in this field for more than a decade, why, I want to ask you a fundamental question is, why do you think elephant conservation is important?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I guess I have a few ways of addressing that. So my research career, my PhD at least, my PhD work kind of started in some ways in response to this question. So I think that in conservation, especially with a species like an elephant, a creature like an elephant, that conserving them is so costly, right? Like there's one thing that setting aside habitat, sort of not having sort of economic development is one thing. But there's lots of evidence. There's, even when I started my PhD in 2008, there's a lot of evidence of ecosystem services from forests and mangroves and pollination services and all that. So, there's already some pretty well established examples of how nature sort of, we don't consider economics, but nature provides clear services to people. And so people were able to sort of justify general conservation in that way. But elephant conservation is a little bit different in the sense that, it's not just, you're not just like setting aside space, to prevent maybe foregoing some economic development opportunities. With elephants, like we mentioned, are actively harming people in many situations, right? They're actively eating their crops, knocking down their homes, making communities more safe, making it harder for people to go to school. And so my PhD was like, well, I was motivated by the question, like, well, maybe there are things that they do for our ecosystems as well, right? Maybe there are ecosystem services that they provide that maybe offset these costs. And so, you're doing a PhD now. I think anyone who's done a PhD, you kind of start out with a big, huge, if you're young and naive like I was, you start with a very ambitious sort of idea of what you want to study, then you gradually narrow. And I ultimately narrowed my PhD study to the role of elephants as seed dispersers in Buxar Tiger Reserve in North Bengal. And so my question was, if you if elephants were to be removed from the system, would the other species in the system be able to disperse seeds as well as elephants, right? Because elephants eat a lot of fruit. They can swallow big seeds. They can swallow a mango seed, for instance, no problem. They'll take them pretty far distances because they can go up to 50 kilometers in a day without too much issue, right? So they can disperse these seeds far, and so then seeds get to a broader area just by probabilities chance. Some of them will end up in a place where they can grow into trees, and especially because the seeds are also put in nice heap of elephant dung, so they get fertilizer, and so it seemed that elephants are doing something that other species couldn't do. So my question was, if elephants were removed from the ecosystem, would other species be able to sort of replicate their seed dispersal services for the ecosystem? Or would there be a big loss in dispersal? And I focused on 3 tree species in Buxa Tiger Reserve. And so we measured each piece of this. We measured how much fruits are different species taking from the tree. And, for the plant species, we measured how long they keep the seeds in their gut and how, what proportion of them are likely to germinate into trees. So we did all that, and we set up a mathematical model, and we found that for the species we were looking at, the three of them, for the one that was most dependent on elephants, Dillenia indica, elephants were dispersing like 60% of the seeds, like 60, right? So, and even in the best case scenario, like if you assume that other species could eat a lot of those fruits and then disperse, some of those seeds, still there'd be a reduction in 25% of dispersal of these seeds, right? And so, like the species, Dillenia indica, if you've seen it, like a hard fruit, it seems to be evolved to be dispersed by elephants. So that's kind of the best, the sort of the most dependent mutualist for elephants. And so in that case, somewhere between 25 and 60% dependency on elephants for the seed dispersal. Now, the other end of the spectrum are about 3 species, which they're all large fruited species that are mammal dispersed. Artocarpus chaplacha. So Artocarpus was basically, without elephants, there'd be only a 9% reduction in the number of seeds if domestic animals and bovids and buffalo and macaques and all these other animals were to disperse the seeds instead. But the median seed would only go 10% as far as the median seed would if elephants were around, right? So if 10% as far means 1% the area. So the median seed was able to access an area about 100 times as big with elephants than without elephants. So, basically you could see that elephants play some, unique functional role in ecosystems. But, so it's very tempting then to say like, oh, without elephants, the ecosystems might collapse and sort of make these sort of arguments. But, the evidence for that isn't quite there on multiple fronts. Right? One is that we looked at only a few species, right? There's a bunch of other tree species in the ecosystem. And you can see like in places like the Americas, there used to be mammoths, there used to be gomphothirs, giant sloths, all these megafauna. They've all been wiped out, probably in large part by human hunting. And yet the Amazon is the most vibrant forest ecosystem in the world, right? So it's not clear that, and I can go into a lot more detail about this, but it's not clear that elephants are actually critical for the existence of forests. And then on the other side, if you're a person living in this community, in fact, one day I was opening elephant dung in Rajmatawa, a village in Buxa Tiger Reserve, and I was looking for seeds. And one of my friends came and was like, I don't understand why you're doing this. You're coming from the US, you have this education. Why are you opening dung and looking for seeds? So I explained as best I could in Hindi. I explained the thesis to him, and he's like, "Oh, iske liye aapko hathi chahiye. That's why you want elephants, so you can disperse these seeds." He's like, "Tell you what, pay me a little bit of money. We'll go and disperse the seeds. We planted these whole forests back in the British period. We'll disperse the seeds. You can get rid of the elephants, and then we don't have to worry about defending our crops and defending our houses from the elephants. What do you say, right?" And his point is really good. Sure, elephants might be providing these benefits, but if you're a poor person living in these areas, or even if you just care about humanity in general, do the costs that elephants sort of impose on us as a society, are they really outweighed by these benefits? Like, if you were there, would you be like, oh good, they're dispersing seeds, fine, you can take my crops, you can knock down my house, right? And so I think that, we should be, as conservationists, honest with the public, right? Maybe some of these species do play an ecological role that's very important. But that's not the real reason we want to protect them. That's not the reason that my friend who asked that question loves elephants. we love elephants for the reasons we were talking about earlier. They're fascinating. They're individuals. They enrich our lives, right? They inspire us. That's the real reason we're conserving them. It's not some functional thing. Even if my study found that elephants didn't disperse seeds very well, would you be less interested in conserving them? Would you? Actually, no, right? We still want them. So let's be honest. Like, this is why we're doing it. We're doing it because they're awesome, right? But the thing is that we're afraid that if we just say that the reason we want to protect them is because they enrich our lives, if we don't give it functional reason, that people will say like, oh, well, that's not a good enough reason. And I think that what we should really say is like, as conservationists, our priorities are to make sure that people's human rights are protected, that they have the right to education, that they realize their right to education, they realize their right to livelihoods, that their futures matter to us, but that we also want to protect this wildlife that have their own life experiences, that feel joy and suffering, that have, in my mind, a right as well to be protected by the most powerful species on earth, which is us. And we had to figure out a way to make sure that both these species and all the other species have some level of protection. Human rights can come first, animal rights, animal welfare, conservation might come second, but we can get both, and that should be the goal. And sorry, so the purpose might be a little bit different, and the purpose then therefore leads to a different agenda and prioritization when it comes to conservation.
Yes, thank you, Nitin, because when we look at the highly suitable habitat of elephants, that clearly overlaps with such a highly populated. And all these people who are living in these fringes are people with poor economic background. And for them, so that makes it more complicated, as in to see how these people are dealing with these losses that's incurring because of elephants. And I am actually a little curious. Yeah, please go on.
Actually, if I could say something about that, and I mean, like I said, I was born and raised in the U.S., right? So I was raised in the state of Alabama, which is in the South, and there's big place where there's lots of civil rights issues, and there's a big gun culture in Alabama. At least there was when I was growing up there, and there still is. And if there was a chipmunk is like a small rodent. You can fit on the palm of your hand. It has stripes, like the palm squirrels in India. If there was a chipmunk that was digging a small hole in a yard in my neighbor's backyard, and this isn't a yard that they use for agriculture or even recreation, it's just there to be pretty. If a chipmunk was digging a hole, some of my neighbors would take out a gun and shoot the chipmunk, right? And they're like, this is my property. If the chipmunk does something, I'm going to shoot it because that's mine. I can do whatever I want. Like, who cares about the chipmunk? What's the attitude, right? Whereas in India, and these are not poor people I'm talking about. These are people who have, middle class, working class, middle class people in the U.S.
Yeah.
And in India, you have poor people who are like, थोड़ा लेके जाने से चलेगा, लेकिन बहुत नहीं लेके जाना पड़ेगा, right? Like, it's okay if they take a little, but they shouldn't take a lot, right? That level of tolerance, that is the reason we have elephants still in India, right? No other country that's this crowded has this much megafauna. And, people, folks who are the leaders of conservation in India, folks like, Lieutenants or Raman Sukumar, all these folks, they definitely deserve credit for some of India's conservation success. But at the end of the day, if the poor people, the peasants of India who've been underserved by us, talented, brilliant people who've been underserved by Indian government and economics, if they said, you know what, we're sick of this, India's a democracy. The elephants would be gone like that. Just like the wolves were killed in the US, just like so many other animals have been killed in Europe, elephants would be gone. And the reason I think the heroes of elephant conservation in India are the people who are willing to live alongside them despite the cost. And if we want to be good conservationists, we have to serve both those people and the elephants. That's at least my philosophy.
Yes, that's so true. The kind of tolerance that's seen in India is incredible across India, where people losing their life in the whole year, the hard work, the toil that they do in the farm, and then it's just lost overnight. So that I want to take this conversation a bit to the historical part of how this interaction actually began. So So the human-elephant interaction have actually has a long history. So there are evidences which actually attest to such interaction going back to 2000 years ago. So there are Gaja Shastra and other Indian literature texts that actually talks about how elephants have to be removed in these agricultural lands for better economic statements like that. So could you share insights on how these interactions have been in the past and how it's evolved over time in India?
I mean, I think this is not my area of expertise, but I think that you might know as much or more about it than I do. But so I mean, my understanding is, I mean, so The History of Asia's Elephants by Raman Sukumar is a wonderful book that kind of covers a lot of this ground, showing there's an ancient history of crop breeding, and that maybe even Ganesha as a god evolved sort of as people were trying to appease elephants and say, please don't take. They start praying to Ganesha because please don't take more than a certain amount so we can survive. And then he evolved as a god. I feel like there's obviously like a deep sort of relationship, a deep and long relationship between not just elephants and humans, but also a state role, right? Like in Advaita Shastra, they have, this is the oldest example of protected areas, I think, in written documentation, is that they wanted to set aside elephant reserves, not for pure conservation, but because they need elephants for war. And so anyway, there's a long history of that, and I I have suspicions about how that has evolved in the last couple thousand years. I mean, I think that as human technology became more and more powerful, and we went from bows and arrows to guns, and and just generally, right, we explosives, like it went from being a thing that maybe you needed the state's power, or at least either to go after elephants, or at least you needed their permission, because the state had an interest in protecting elephants, to people being able to really defend themselves more and more easily over time. I mean, people have been able to exterminate elephants for a long time, right? Like we're talking about in the Americas, indigenous people seem to have gotten rid of them. In China, the state was able to get rid of elephants very quickly. So that technological capacity has been there at a societal level for quite a bit of time. But I think that now it's become easier and easier for people to create small crude bombs or poison elephants, and I think that so I think that that's become easier, and thankfully, the Indian state has also then created strong conservation laws to sort of prevent the abuse of that power at this elephant habitat. But then we overcorrected and we didn't do enough to protect local people. So that's my broad history. But I want to say something that's been much more in a much more sort of smaller time scale. That, as you said, I worked at WWF India for 5 years at the National Lead for Elephant Conservation, and one of our big priorities was compiling data on human death and elephant death across. We wanted to try initially across the country, but also in key states. And so we put together a media database using basically there's an organization called Save the Elephants that had Googled Asian elephant every day starting 2004 up until the present. Now it's automated, and they're basically putting all the articles on the data community as well as newspapers to track how human-elephant conflict had changed from 2004 until 2018 was the database eyes I looked after it. And my successor, Aditya Shetri, who's an amazing field ecologist, he's extended that now to the present. So basically, we got that data, and then we struggled after lots of debate and discussion. We were able to get a few state governments to give us access to their official data on human and elephant death. And I want to make a couple of points. One is that, we can talk to people like Raman Sukumar and other experts, and they have some data and they can kind of piece together a reasonable picture. But the fact is that Asian elephant conservation is not data oriented enough. It's mostly experts giving their opinion, giving their experiences, talking to local people. But I haven't seen any really good studies analyzing patterns of human elephant conflict across the last 20 years using high quality data and high quality statistics at scale. And there have been, like Sanjay Gubbi has done some work, for instance, in in the local regional scale in Canada. It's not that there's no war, but like to actually look at, what is driving conflict, right? Is it because more people are there? Or is it because there's more elephants there? Or is it because of both? Or is it because of habitat degradation? Is it because of climate change? Is it because of water availability? Like, we're working on that now, struggling to do it with the minimum amounts of funding for this kind of work. And so I would say, so my answer to your question is like, we actually don't know. We actually cannot tell you really how human-elephant conflict has changed in any systematic way, because the basic data sets, the fundamental research has not been invested in. Project Elephant gets, 30 crores a year? Like, that's like, I think that works out to 10,000 rupees per elephant, right? Like, I pay more than that just to go on safari and for a couple of times in Woodabali, right? So like the investment isn't there, the data isn't there, and we're all guessing. It's actually the answer to your question about how human-elephant conflict has changed over the last several decades at scale.
Nitin, I'm just very curious of the patterns that you were collecting, what is the time scale of the pattern that you were at least trying to collect the data for?
So for the media database, we had data from 2004 to 2018. Like I said, I was expanding that, and the spatial scales throughout India, right? So we had media reports across the board. Although, and I actually can show you. Could I share a slide? Would that be okay?
Sure.
Yes. So this is from. Let's see. Share my screen.
You're the co-host, so I think yeah.
Excellent.
We can.
Okay.
Yes.
So, all right. So you can see the slide, right?
Yes, it's visible.
Great. So yeah. So this is another demonstration of how bad our data is in elephant conservation. So and I want to shout out to my co-authors, especially Sanchia Sharma, who's done amazing work on this on this research. But basically, so what you see here is the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. They're the sort of official stewards of animal ranges across India, right? And so you can see the dark blue is the IUCN range according to, or the elephant range according to IUCN. And you can see that the purple and light blue districts are the districts where IUCN says they're elephants. But our HEC database, Human Elephant Conflict Database, that from 2004 to 2018, found a bunch of other districts. These are the districts in red, where we found there's human-elephant conflict, but the IUCN said there's no elephants, right? Now, how can there be human-elephant conflict if there aren't elephants? And so, and you can see how bad this is, right? Like in East Central India, like there's districts far from the official range that have elephants. South India also has several districts. The Northeast is ulta, right? The media doesn't report human-elephant conflict properly from the Northeast. There isn't as much, I think, sort of emphasis on the English media. Maybe it may not be as present there, even though it's more English is spoken in that region. And so it's not even. The media database isn't good enough to know where elephants are by itself. But the point is that the IUCN data is really outdated, and it's not even just a recent thing. So if you look at, these are the districts that our media database shows have elephants that are outside the IUCN range. And you can see that some of them have had human-elephant conflict as far back as 2006. And the latest, the IUCN elephant range came out in 2016. So it's more than 10 years behind, more than 18 years behind. We don't even know where the elephants are, Aishwarya. So if we don't know where the elephants are, how can we do something so simple? If we can do that, something that's simple, how can we understand something complex like the causes and drivers of human-elephant conflict? And so as far as the data we've collected from the government, that's been more, I don't know if I have slides on that here. Yeah, so this is from Coimbatore district where I was living for the last 3 years. So we got data from 2010 onwards for the for all of the state of Assam, and I think now they have for Tamil Nadu as well. We started with just Coimbatore district, and I think the WF team's also now doing it in Kerala. And so gradually we're getting, but it's still over 15, 20-year period. To answer your question.
Wow, that's incredible to know that. Is it because of not documenting the movement of elephants in all these landscape and the challenges regarding knowing the movement patterns of elephants?
No, and I think so. I mean, I think this is basically an institutional failure, right? If you were to go to these places and you were talk to forest department officials, they know where the elephants are, right? I'm over villages. Like, it's not that the information doesn't exist. It means that it's that the information isn't filtering up to the IUCN, right? So, and this is what I'm saying. There is no investment. Like 30 crores is nothing. Like, when I was in, India last year, they had a meeting on Project Elephant had a meeting in Kaziranga where the president of India, Draupadi Murmu, came, right? And they launched our human elephant conflict field manual there. But I'm pretty sure they spent 8 crores just on the visit, right? That's almost a third of the budget of annual budget. And so I was saying 10,000 rupees per elephant before. Now how much is left, right? 3,000 or whatever, 6,000 rupees per elephant. I mean, it's just not enough to collect this kind of, data. And right? People aren't being in the forest department aren't being rewarded necessarily for doing good work, and they're good people and dysfunctional people in the forest department, right? We know there's diversity, and the institution does not necessarily always reward people who are willing to try and build these kind of data streams. So it's and it makes you wonder if the situation is this bad for Asian elephants, one of the most charismatic species, right? What about, I mean, tigers, I agree. There are institutions out there that are serving tigers, at least the data collection there. Lord knows whether they're allowing the experts to actually analyze the data correctly. Well, we know they're not, mostly. But for other animals, it's even worse, right? For other species, it's even worse. Sloth bears, mongooses, nilgitar, you name it. Like,
definitely,
it's nilgitar is different because in Tamil Nadu, there's quite a bit of attention and good local work. But anything that's at scale I think is harder.
Yes, definitely. This goes to show how important funding and research on such important issue is. And I want to ask you, since this is one of the most, this is also one of the challenge that goes into elephant conservation, and you've led elephant conservation for 5 years. So I want to ask you, what other challenges do you think is something that has to be immediately addressed when it comes to conserving elephants?
So I mean, part of my bias is that I'm trained as a scientist, right? So my tendency is to look at some of these data issues like, there should be more systematic efforts to count elephants, know where they are. I mean, without the fundamental data, I don't know how you can make decisions, or even understand what the problem is. That same with human elephant conflict data, all this stuff. But I mean, another really big problem is, like I said, if we start with the premise that, this is the most important thing we do as conservationists is deal with the quality of human and animal life, right? Like, are these animals and our people who live with these animals, are they having good quality lives or not? That's the most important thing, right? And so a big part of that when it comes to elephants is the elephants sort of impose costs on local communities. And I think a clear thing that needs to happen is that we need compensation systems that say, that are fair and just. So if you lose something to an elephant, if you lose a human life, people should be paid a lot, right? That person has probably involuntarily sacrificed their life for elephant conservation. Their family should absolutely be supported, in a way that makes sure that they have the economic opportunities they deserve. So that should be compensated fully, and compensation rates are, at least when I last checked, were going up across many states. But also, if you lose crops, right? There's this whole thing we don't want to incentivize people to free ride, right? We want to make sure that they try and defend their crops, and from elephant. If we compensate them fully, then they won't even try and protect their crops. So we're not going to compensate them fully. Now, there's a real issue there, right? Like the people could free ride, but have they been given the opportunity? Like, have you tried to chase an elephant from your field? Like, can you do it? Right? You're asking them to go and risk their lives, right? And you're saying that you had risk their lives without. You can't use a gun. You can't shoot the animal. You have to go and with tamasha, throwing fireworks and dancing and stuff. You need to push them away. So, I mean, to me, the state has to make sure that people actually have the capacity to protect their property and fields. And they can hold them accountable for protecting their fields from animals. And if they do try to protect their property and still the animals make it, we owe them full compensation. That's the least we can do, right? So many people make so much money on tourism. The local people should at least be compensated for the losses that they incur, right?
Yes.
And so, I mean, to me, a socially just, a truly pro-poor, pro-human regime for compensation. We can have safeguards against free riding, but that regime is to me the most important thing, alongside data, like actually having data on elephants, so we can do to help make elephant conservation better. I'll stop there.
Nitin, since you mentioned driving elephants back from their crop field, so if you've just witnessed that, it's such a situation where you're putting yourself at that risk. And since one of my objective of my PhD is trying to look at what are the different techniques that they're looking at for elephant drive operations. So I'm really curious to ask you about, in your study area that you've done, the Buxa Tiger Reserve, how are people risking? What are the kind of techniques that they are using to chase away or the elephants to protect their crops in that area?
It's been 12 years since I stopped living in Buxa. I go back every now and then, but so I can't really comment too much on what's happening now. But I don't think it's changed a lot. It does seem, people have largely stopped in Rajbatkawa, where I was staying most of my time. People largely stopped planting rice and planting corn. They just stopped planting. So that's, they're like, thankfully, they have most people have other economic opportunities. There are other panchayat schemes. And so like people are like, well, we'll rather just not plant the crops and not risk our lives chasing them with, like firecrackers and, yelling and screaming. And some people build fences and like, all that kind of stuff. But so that's one adaptation that over the last, I think, 7-8 years, people have, they just changed their economic sort of their livelihood portfolio. But otherwise, it's not I've been surprised that sort of my closest friends there, they're not using electric fences. They actually don't have the tools. They haven't been trained to set up non-lethal fences and stuff. So that isn't one of them. But more broadly, I'm sure I think in South India there's been more of an arms race, right? You set up regular single strand fences. The elephants know how to get rid of those, and now there's hanging electric fences, and they're like there's some bio fences, and like there's all those things happening at a much faster pace in South India, whereas in Central India and East India, those elephants haven't learned how to break down simple electric fences as easily yet. So those are the interventions that are more at use. But yeah, even today, like WF has still been training people to go out there with patas, with firecrackers and these.
Okay.
Yeah. They also do like.
But the other
and I have, if you want, I have data. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm saying the other technique does also bear such a economical burden on these individuals who are using electric fences and probably don't have access to such a technique.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I don't have a ready answer, especially because there's so much variation in India, right? South, and even within regions, there's so much. Like, some people might actually be able to afford to make these investments, but they don't. In other cases, but they don't. Maybe they don't know how, right? Other people, can't afford it at all, and they deserve support from the state to build these things. But then, how do you make sure they maintain it, right? Like this, and we have as you mentioned, there's a human elephant conflict field manual that we put together that's co-published with Project Elephant, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. That at least as of a year ago, put forth our best ideas as to how to make sure that people have access to this, both the knowledge and the resources to protect their communities with the best available well, not best available, but affordable and a scalable technology. So I think that that's another place where there needs to be more attention. And people need to think about it. You go get, if you want to work on this, go get a training in economics and development economics and livelihoods. Don't just study ecology, right? Because there's people who've developed an expertise in rural livelihoods and governance, who can help a lot with this. And actually, if I can shout out Arjun Kamdar, who's one of my colleagues when I was at WWF, he's published a paper on fences as public goods, like why some fences fail and some fences are maintained properly in Assam, in ecology and society. And now he's starting his master's and PhD in England. I'm sure he'll do more good stuff. But he brings the sociological perspective into how we do conservation.
Yes. Nitin, could you also comment on how crucial the role of community is in managing such human-elephant conflict? Because it's not just the forest department, but as you mentioned, a lot of tolerant individuals are to be given credit for having. So could you mention how important and the role of communities there in the concept of human-elephant interactions and conflict management?
Sure. So if you take a couple of different ways to think about this, right? One is if you take the rights-based approach to conservation, which I think we should. The community is the main stakeholder, right? So their interests are paramount to a just form of conservation. We should take advantage of the fact that they have less political power or less economic power, right? We should say, you are either the most or one of the most important stakeholders in this problem. So what your interests are, what your ideas are, is important. So that's one. And the other thing is, when it comes to coming up with solutions, they're the folks who actually understand, where do the elephants come from? What do they come and do? How often do they come? Like, they have this local knowledge, and they know, you can make a fence, but honestly, it's no one here is going to take care of it. Like, why? Why won't they take care of it? Like, it's because the folks on the outside, they don't actually, they don't have any maybe they don't have any money and they don't have any training. They don't know how to take care of a fence, and so they're not going to do it. Or they're like, they know that if they open the fence, the animals will go straight to the center of the village and they'll eat other people's crops. Their crops. I mean, that's not a good example, but you get the idea that there's local information, there's local knowledge that they will have. And actually, that what I just described did happen. So in Assam, there's a place where the elephants would come. We call it an elephant. The elephants would come and hang out in the forest, in the woods. And they would never actually, they had someone put a fence up there, but the people then could maintain the fence because the people said that the elephants never actually grazed in their farms next to the woods. They would go far away from the woods, graze on someone else's farm, and then come back and hide in the woods. And I guess the elephants figured out that if they graze in the farms nearby, the local people will push them out of the woods. So they made sure that, that their canteen was far from their bedroom, right? Basically. And so anyway, so there's all this local knowledge that I can say, I have a fancy degree and I have all this knowledge. I read all these English journals. But the fact is, like I said, the data is really bad. So if you want information that's pertinent to solving the problem, you have to talk to the local stakeholders.
Yes. Since you mentioned one of your field story, I'm really curious to ask if there is any memorable story while you were in Buxa that you would want to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, I probably at this point have dozens or hundreds. That's part of why I wrote the book, because I just was like, I need to get mostly it's not about my story, it's mostly about other people. But even then, the people I met that moved me, I wanted to put their stories in out for the public. So if you're interested, please go read the book. But one thing that it did not make it into the book, one story was there was a captive elephant named Digambar in one of the camps in Buxa. So for my PhD, like I said, we would go and we'd feed elephants fruit and then see how many of the seeds came out of their dung. And so you can't really do that with wild elephants consistently. So we did that with captive elephants. And, I mentioned zoos as a part of my childhood, and so obviously I understand the role of having some of the utility of having animals in captivity, but like keeping animals in captivity is really, it's heartbreaking especially animals that like elephants that need a lot of space. And so Digambar was a really, the caretakers are pretty afraid of him. He was a violent elephant, right? And he was a young male. And so they wouldn't, with the other elephants, they would allow us to go and pick up the dung ourselves and bring it out. But with Digambar, we weren't allowed to do that. So when I was looking, writing my meditation, what time he pooped, I wouldn't actually get near him. I'd stand far. He was chained, right? Which is they're chained like most of the day. It's horrible. And so I would be observing him from a distance, and I'd be writing, okay, I made a map. Where did he poop and what time did he poop? I was doing that one day, and suddenly something hit me in the chest. And I looked down, and I realized that Digambar had uprooted a plant with the roots, and he had thrown it at me and hit me in the chest. And poor guy's bored. So I was telling you, talk to him. I was like, oh, that was a good throw. How about if you throw it a little bit higher, I can catch it. Just talking, I threw it back to him. The elephant picked up this plant again, and he again threw it. And he threw it high enough that I could catch it. And so I caught it, and I threw it back to him. And then he again picked it up and again threw it. So it was basically playing catch with an elephant, right? I mean, I was catching, he was playing. Yeah, he couldn't catch it. He tried. When I threw it back, he couldn't move his trunk, but his trunk wasn't able to move that in that particular way to catch the thing. And so, and I was like, no one's here, no one's witnessing this. So, I got my team, we kept on trying to do it again and again. Usually later when I threw him something, he just put in his mouth, he was hungry. But after 3 days of trying, finally, when he was full, he was throwing a stick back and forth with me, and we got it on camera, actually. And to me, like, it shows what we are losing when we put these animals in captivity without proper stimulation, without proper relationships, right? This guy has an active mind. He's curious. He wants to go out there and engage in the world. And we have him tied up to a tree, right? Like, and we're like, oh, he's violent. And it's true. Like, the local most poor guys, they don't have the resources to handle a violent elephant. They didn't have any choice. But again, if we care about elephants, we should invest in that. Invest in having, sometimes, first of all, we should minimize how much we bring them into captivity. But if we have to bring them into captivity, then we should invest in making sure they have access to good facilities, access to companionship from other elephants, access to stimulation as much as possible, like in places like Kaziranga and Mudambale, access to go and spend some time in the real forest. And, like I said, it's not just human rights. Animal welfare, animal quality of life should also be central to conservation. It shouldn't just be about us elite, conservationists getting to go and spend time in safari, right? It should be about this, at the center should be human rights, animal quality of life. And I think that, Digambar, to me, he symbolized, both the problems that we have with elephants in captivity and the promise of actually recognizing the beauty of individual elephant life.
Thanks for sharing that, Nitin. That was also very insightful. And since you also mentioned about your book, What's Left of the Jungle, I want to end this talk by asking you to share your journey of writing this book and what really inspired you to document all these experience, and what message do you hope to convey with your work?
So I think what motivated me to write the book is a couple of things. First of all, I spent 6 years doing a PhD, and I think at the end of the day, probably my philosophy is that the number of people who cite your papers is probably several times more than the number of people who read your papers, right? Because people will look at the paper, and most people who cite it, they read the abstract, they get the one thing that they want, they keep going, right? So I think I've spent 6 years on a PhD, and probably only a couple of dozen people read those papers through and through. And so I was like, well, if I want to communicate with the public, maybe I should use a more accessible media. And I'm not, not good at TikTok and that kind of stuff. So the medium I chose, and I like in-depth engagement. So the medium I chose was a book. And so that's one thing, is I thought that's a better way to communicate. But the other thing is that actually when I kind of like, I thought that being trained in ecology would make me a good conservationist. But when I was out there in Buxa, engaging on these issues, meeting people who were living with elephants and seeing the economic problems, the political challenges, the sociological sort of mysteries that underpin conservation, I sort of realized that, there should be a way to help people understand what conservation is really about, right? Conservation was born in the biological sciences, but it shouldn't stay there. It is actually a social science. It's an economic science. It's a philosophical, sort of question, right? What values are we actually trying to promote? And I was hoping that through the book I could convey that, right? And the main story of the book is the story of my assistant Nakshu Aktari, right? And he was born in Buxa, what became Buxa Tiger Reserve. He grew up, herding cattle and growing crops in the forest. He participated in some smuggling. He participated in some poaching, and his story. But he loves it, and he's the most just a fundamentally wonderful, decent guy. And his story to me captures the essence of what conservation is about, what it should be about. And I thought that this book will convey that in an interesting, engaging way, and hopefully people who read it connect with this individual and they generalize that to so many of the people who live alongside wildlife, and who we should serve and work with if we want to do conservation.
Yes, thank you so much, Nitin. That actually summarizes how you would be able to get such enriching experience and connections when you are connecting with such individuals in the field and getting their perspective of what it takes to live with animals around them. So we do have few questions before we wrap up from the audience. I think a couple of them. Vignesh asks, could you please explain about some effective mechanism to prevent human-elephant conflict? That's a
Sorry? What did you say?
That's a broad, that's a complicated question.
Yeah. No, but it's a complicated question, but it's also a very fair question, right? That's what so Vignesh, I think that if you've ever been to a zoo that has elephants, they're able to keep those elephants inside, right? They have deep moats, they have strong barriers. And so, and if we had the resources to invest in sort of those kind of interventions, just to protect communities that have agriculture from elephants, and in principle and theory, we could do it. The problem is the combination of it being effective and it being affordable, right? We cannot afford to build Western zoo grade barriers across rural India to keep elephants, at least not yet. Maybe India's moving forward. Maybe we can. I don't know. And so the question then is, how do you walk that line? And so I think that if you're able to find our field manual, and maybe I can even put a link in the chat box before we go. Basically, what we say is, you have to find the right barrier, the right combination of affordability and effectiveness based on your situation. So if you're in places like Northeast India, where elephants haven't yet learned how to break down barriers as much, and they're still quite afraid of people in many cases, I think because there's still some hunting going on of elephants up there, right? So where they have that healthy fear, even a single-strand electric fence that my colleagues pioneered, non-lethal electric fence, can be effective. In fact, the communities there will tell you that they're 90+% effective. And the only, and the issue then is making sure the communities maintain that fence properly. Then as you get to South India, in many places, the question is, okay, elephants have figured out you can, just use their feet or their tusks to get past a single strand fence. So then hanging fences are relatively effective, right? So these are things I think they developed in Sri Lanka, where the pole is like this, it's shaped like a T, and then the wire hangs down, so the elephant can't get to the post and knock it down and it can't reach up to the top post, and so they're much more expensive, but they're more effective. But then and then in other places you need maybe elephants have figured out how to get past those. They just walk through and they're willing to take the pain. But then what happens in that situation is you need interventions that deal with individual elephants, right? So you might find that you get 90% of the elephants are prevented with the hanging fence. Only 5-10% of elephants are willing to get through. And of those 10%, maybe you can scare away, half of them, 80% just by going out there, firecrackers, chasing them, having early warning systems. But then there's some elephants that you can't easily chase them away. They go through hanging fences. And for those, that's when captivity becomes potentially a necessary option. If they're killing people, and we have this in the manual too, if they're regularly killing people, you may want to skip captivity, right? You might have to just kill the animal. But basically, you want to grade your response based on the nature of the individuals or the nature of the community of elephants that are causing conflict. But at the same time, first of all, for animal captivity, we should treat them really, really well. They should have amazing care. The quality of care that you see in elephant whisperers, but maybe even better, right? And in addition, we should be restoring their habitat, right? Because there is, when it comes to lantana, climate change, all these things, we should probably make sure that elephants have enough to support them in their habitat. And finally, elephant populations are probably increasing in places, have increased in places where they've been successfully conserved. We probably need to have fertility control for elephants. In Southern Africa, they use a contraceptive called PZP. And so to make sure that the elephant population doesn't get too big so that they're no longer supported by natural resources, they make sure that females don't have too many offspring. And you just go and you dart them. You don't have to do that. It's not invasive. It's a non-invasive dart. And you do it and we can do modeling to make sure that we're darting these elephants at the right pace. So elephants still get to have families. Obviously, they love having calves and they have a rich family life. You don't want to take that away from them completely. But instead of having 4 offspring in a lifespan, maybe they can have 2, right? And if we make sure that the resources are sufficient for the elephants, and there are not too many elephants for the amount of the resources available in the wild, I think that you can have good quality of life for elephants, successful conservation of elephants, and make sure that people, are able to contribute.
Thank you so much, Nitin. We actually do have some more questions, but unfortunately, we are running out of time. But this has been incredible honor to have you on our panel. We might have to end this talk now. So, I'm
willing to hang around a bit longer if you don't have a time constraint. But
sure. Yeah. So I think I can read a couple more questions if you're fine.
Sure.
So one of them asks, how do you deal with the economic and social problems that arise with human displacement issue that is at the heart of problems you're trying to solve? So in trying to solve human-animal conflict, you have created a displacement issue, the collective resentment that comes with it. So it leads to uncontrollable urbanization. How do you purpose to solve them with the kind of resources that you have?
Yeah. So this is one place where I might, I think that India made a big mistake when it came to how protected areas were established across the country. The Wildlife Protection Act says very clearly that you need to settle people's rights before you declare a protected area, and we did not do that, right? And so I think that the Forest Rights Act is absolutely the right way to go. You need some protections to make sure that local people's use of resources is sustainable, and but I think that basically what kind of at the heart of what Sirisha is saying, I think, is a question of how do you handle the politics of negotiation. So a couple of things. One, we should stop. There should be no more forced displacement. Right? I know it's still happening. In fact, I think the Indian government's coming at it with a new vigor. I think it's ridiculous. Like, I think that we have plenty of, good logical reasons to take a right-based approach. And conservation shouldn't be riding on the backs of the poorest people in the country. It's just nonsense, right? So first thing, matter of principle, we have the Forest Rights Act. We have a great law in the books. Let's figure out how to make it work. Let's invest in making it work. Let's enforce it. Both from a pro-conservation angle and from a pro-people angle. So there shouldn't be more displacement. So now, if not displacement, then what, right? That's the question. We know that people impose a cost on their environments, right? People aren't, it's not like just, they lived here for hundreds of years, thousands of years, they're living in equilibrium with the environment. That's not true, right? Like, sure, sometimes some people have maintained their traditional practices, but even if that's true, as the number of people has increased, those very same practices that might have been sustainable 200 years ago are no longer sustainable. But on top of that, I'm telling you, folks living in these communities, they don't want to sit there doing the same thing that their dada did, right? They want internet. They want phones. They want motorcycles. They want to travel, and they deserve to have those opportunities, right? You guys, you're on about it. You have to stay the same. Like, that's also, so, I mean, both sides of the debate, folks who say that the local people are harmless to the environment, they're wrong. And local people will tell you they're wrong, right? Like in Melghat, they told me that when communities were displaced from Melghat or relocated, there's questions to how voluntary it was. They'll tell you that then the animals came back, right? So even local people will say, yeah, like because there are fewer people, there's more animals. So that's not true. On the other hand, people who just say, let's just move these folks out, like they're anti-humanist, right? They are privileging their elite conservation values over that of they want to go in. They want to go into their jeeps and see all the wildlife, but they don't want the local people who've lived there, right? It's just nonsense. So both sides, ridiculous. So what do you do instead, right? And in my mind, what you do is you set up you have to have a reasonable negotiation structure. The Forest Rights Act provides that. And you can go to community and say, look, we have collected evidence. This is the impact you're having on your environment. We want to reduce that impact, right? So how can we make it worthwhile for you, right? And you have a negotiation until the ground level is willing to say yes, right? You say, okay, we'll improve your schools, we'll improve your access to Nal Yojana, right? We'll give you access to these yojanas. We'll provide protection for all human-wildlife conflict. We'll provide you gas so you don't have to go get firewood, right? And you have to have the negotiation. And if the community tries to ask for too much, you say, well, this is the budget. This is what we can provide you. Is it enough or is it not? And if it is, then hopefully you get something better. And the community says, no, it's not enough. Well, they can still live there and they can still sort of do certain practices that they need to live, but they're still not allowed to hunt, right? The Wildlife Protection Act protects the wildlife there. And so anyway, I think that basically you need negotiation. And the folks who are trying to circumvent the Forest Rights Act is because they don't care as much about local people, or they don't have the patience for the messy political process that's required in order to do good conservation. I think we missed something from Piago TV. It says, when we're all running electric, modern means more hi-fi electric, more increased green space. Green space doesn't necessarily mean creating forests in general, because people don't know how much they depend on forests, mostly. Okay, so where do you think it will lead to? So, I mean, I am not sure. I'm going to just make my best interpretation of your question, Tiago, and I'd say that basically, I think that India's best chance development trajectory over the long term is to become that more densely have high functioning urban, densely populated urban spaces, right? And in the US, that's what happened. In the US, like there's tremendous deforestation for a couple hundred years, but now forests are coming back as people have moved into cities and suburbs, right? And I think in India, the good job opportunities, good quality of life can be obtained if India invests in good livelihood opportunities for people, education and livelihood opportunities, and setting up, high quality functioning infrastructure and cities like the ones they have in Japan, South Korea, for these other densely populated countries in Asia. And yes, that should hopefully gradually release more green areas. And then, you can have more wildlife at that point. You can stop using as many contraceptives on your elephants, right? Because you have more habitat to support them. But yeah, so I think that I hope that addresses the part of your question. Yeah.
And Nitin, would you be okay answering one last question from the audience?
Yeah. Let's do one last one. Perfect.
Yes. Yeah. How about reaching out to children and future own some of the responsibility and reaching out to them through school system, education system, on their consumer choices, and indirectly that affects the efforts of trying to make the direction of conservation?
So, sorry, 1 second. So I actually will share my screen one more time, because I hopefully the screen will load. Yeah, there you go. So
Yes.
can you see my screen? Okay. Yeah. So we've written a second book. It's a children's book called Elephants to Super Creatures. It's available online. It's available in English, Hindi, Tamil, Malayalam, hopefully Assamese and other languages too eventually. But basically, I mean, to sort of get at the heart of your question, I think that people, especially people living alongside elephants, kids living alongside elephants, they may know a fair bit from there, especially if their parents are, Adivasis or other sort of people who have historically lived with elephants. They may know quite a bit about the traditional knowledge around elephants, but they may not know some of the stuff that modern science has taught us about elephants. And I think that they deserve, if they're living along elephants, they deserve to know just how cool the elephants that they're helping us conserve are. And that's the purpose of this book. And I think that as conservationists, that's another thing that we should definitely be emphasizing. But yeah, it's not just kids in rural areas. I think at the heart of your question, Sirisha, is the recognition that the way all of us consume resources, has an effect on the habitat available for wildlife, the water available for wildlife, climate change, right? Like the quality of the climate and whether animals can survive. And absolutely, we need people to sort of change how we consume in order to make sure that the world is sustainable. And that actually is that's now my new job. So I work at Conservation X Labs, and our theory of change is that we need to come up with, sort of products and sustainable trajectories, by which people can continue to enjoy a high quality of life, with minimum change, but do so without imposing such costs on biodiversity and natural spaces. And my particular job is in alternative proteins, because I'm sure any of you working in conservation know climate change, one of the biggest threats to biodiversity, up there, either tied or number 2, is habitat loss. And one of the biggest causes of habitat loss is agriculture. It's the way we eat. Now, in India, this isn't as big a deal as in the US where I live, right? Like, we eat tons of meat in the US, right? Like, as a society, with 70% of the crops we grow are used to feed cattle, right? So then cattle only provide something like 37, so not just cattle, meat, animal products only provide 37% of our protein and 18% of our calories, but we invest 77% of our land and resources into growing animal products. They're highly inefficient, right? Because when you feed a chicken or a cow or whatever, they're using a lot of that energy to stay alive. And then you only get a fraction of that when you kill the animal. Like you only get 9% of the energy you invest in growing a chicken when you eat the chicken. So eating plant-based, eating vegan, or at least being vegetarian is like, something that I don't understand why Indian conservation has not embraced this. Every Indian conservation organization should be vegetarian or vegan, right? And I understand that there's a strong, like a really horrible caste history of like making vegetarianism a pure thing, right? And we shouldn't be going around telling poor people who don't have access to resources that they shouldn't be growing animals or eating meat. That's not what I'm saying. But we who work in conservation organizations, whether in India or abroad, we're not poor people who have no other choice, right? We should be eating plant-based diets. And India has the best plant-based cuisine in the world. People around the world like will love Indian plant-based cuisine. So, I mean, we have to start with ourselves. We can't go around telling kids in schools, you guys need to eat sustainably. You guys need to stop using plastics. Are you guys using single-use plastics? You should stop. Are you guys eating beef and chicken and milk and eggs when there are perfectly healthy alternatives out there? Then you should stop. And when we change our own consumption practices, then we can start saying, hey, let's make it possible. Let's make sure that every school in India has access to high quality pulses, high quality vitamin supplements, high quality greens, right? So they can also eat a sustainable diet, right? We can't go and take eggs away from poor people who have no other source of protein. But we should first start with consuming sustainably ourselves. And then we can also make sure that there are systems that, again, put human rights first. Everyone should have access to great, nutritious food. But let's do it in a way that is good for animal welfare, because also you've seen broiler chickens. Broiler chickens have the worst. Like, I've met so many people who care so much about elephants and so much about dogs, but don't care about broiler chickens. Why? They have a nervous system. They can suffer, right? Don't they also deserve a good quality of life? Like, if you raise an animal well and you kill it very humanely, at least from an animal welfare perspective, there's some justice there. But you treat an animal like shit and then you kill it. Like, how can you say you're an animal lover? Right? You only love the animals that make you feel good. You don't care about the animals that have their own lives, that don't fill you with inspiration the way an elephant fills you with inspiration. So yeah, but all of us got to do this. It's not just about someone else with kids. We all have to change how we consume. And Conservation X Lab is about trying to find alternative protein products, meat, dairy, egg replacements that taste exactly like meat. And I grew up eating meat. Like, it's delicious. I know. We find things that taste exactly like meat, but don't have the repercussions for the climate, for wildlife habitat, for biodiversity, or animal welfare. And I hope all of you who are involved in conservation think about that aspect as well. Human rights, animal welfare, sustainability, and make sure that we walk the walk, right? That we are the change we want to see in the world. And I think that if we build a movement on those principles, we can do awesome stuff.
That's such a wonderful insight and great way of ending the session now, Nitin. Thank you so much for this talk and for your time. It's been great talking to you, and we wish we had more time, but then we might have to end this talk by now. Thank you, Nitin. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the platform, and good luck to all of you. Hope you have a good day.
Let me give you a brief overview of our webinar series. Center for Wildlife Studies is a 40-year-old nonprofit organization specializing in wildlife research, conservation, policy, education. Until 2020, we used to host public talks on latest topics of wildlife science and conservation in our Bangalore office. And due to pandemic, we have instead been conducting a series of webinars. So far, we have our webinars covered a wide range of topics, including public health, zoonotic diseases, elephants and tigers, snake bites, bioacoustics, etc. You can visit our YouTube channel if you want to view our previous webinars. And today's webinar will also be recorded and available on YouTube platform.